Hello, friends. Welcome back to Hmong Women Thriving. Today, I am super excited. I'm so honored to be sitting with Bo Thao-Urabe. Bo is a powerful community leader, advocate, and changemaker whose life journey is as inspiring as it is transformative. She's served on numerous boards and was appointed to the White House Initiative on AAPIs under President Obama. In recognition of her leadership, she was named a Bush Fellow in 2019, and November 1st has even been declared Bo Thao-Urabe Day in St. Paul and across Minnesota. Bo has dedicated her life to creating spaces where voices are often overlooked, will be able to be heard, valued, and uplifted. She's someone who not only leads, but also builds, connects, and reimagines what thriving communities can look like. So, in our conversation today, we'll dive into her journey, the lessons she's learned along the way, and her vision for building a future where all communities can flourish. Bo, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm so excited for our conversation.
You're kind. Thanks for having me.
So, just to start off, I'd love to kind of get to know you. So, to begin, could you kind of share more about your journey from Laos to the US and how those early refugee experiences really shaped your sense of responsibility and leadership?
Sure. Well, I think a lot of Hmong Americans of my generation share my story, and that is that I was born in Laos and I was born during a time of war. And so that's how I came into the world. And it took a lot of people who cared for me in order for me to have survived. And then eventually my family we made our way. It's not like we moved willingly, but in order to survive, my mother really moved us, four small children from the village in Laos because my father was off fighting. To then to a refugee camp in Thailand where mostly Hmong people were. And we lived there for 3 years. And then eventually we were resettled in Chicago where we had some relatives who had come first. And so it's a very, I think if you're Hmong American, it's a story that you've heard before. And when I got to this country at the age of 6, I certainly, you know, didn't know very much. And my parents just did the best that they could to raise us. And then eventually, when I spoke more English than my parents, I became kind of the child that took them to everything, right? They'd take me to doctor's appointments, to even English class, to their first day on the jobs, and all of those different things. And eventually, I started to question a lot of different things about the different systems that my parents had to navigate in order to get help, or the little help that they could get. And eventually, I just felt like a lot of that wasn't working well for them. And so it became kind of the um, precipitate, really that those beginning questions that had to do with my own life became the way in which I entered the work that I'm in now, was because I was living that life and my family was going through it. And so eventually I would just discover a lot more about what it meant to work in community and to help community and to organize community for change, and then learned a bit more about what I was particularly good at, which was really kind of strategic and leadership functions within organizations, and also building programs and partnerships in order to cause change within systems, and then eventually to organize communities to reimagine the future. And so that became kind of my work, right? But I didn't think that helping myself and helping my family would turn into a career. but eventually it did. And so I've spent the last 30 years working in community and philanthropy, and trying to both serve those who are in need, but also trying to manifest a different future for the community. So that's a bit about kind of my own journey, and how I fell into this work, and what I've been doing since. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. Oh, that's so wonderful. My next question for you, I want to talk a little bit about, what were some of the challenges that you faced in navigating some of the systems, not necessarily built for refugees, and how did you learn to advocate, at such a young age?
Yeah. Um, I mean, frankly, you don't really know, right? You do it, and then you discover what doesn't function well. And I would say that the systems that I was born into include things like um, uh, imperialism, right? Patriarchy, racism, classism, all of those isms and things. Those are not things that we built ourselves, but we are born into. And so it was who who I was born to, what I was born as, and who I am in the context of my own story that made me realize how all of those systems of power both create privilege and oppression at the same time for different groups of people, depending on the identities that they had, right? And so, it certainly meant something that I was born a Hmong daughter in a patriarchal culture, right? It means that I was seen as, uh, you know, uh, uh, um, um, a certain way. And then it certainly meant something that I came to this country as a refugee in a global kind of imperialist context, right? Because Hmong people have always been escaping oppression from dominant, cultures and governments that wanted to kind of take away their freedom or those kinds of things, right? Or make them feel less than human and things. And then it also meant something that I came to this country with my family, who came as refugees, who had nothing but sort of a couple of plastic bags that we brought with us to this country. And that meant that we started with very little, right? So to grow up poor and to be in a system, in a capitalist system where you are seen as knowledgeable, smart, important if you have money, but you are not seen as capable or, worthy if you are poor, right? So those are things, or being a second English language speaker, all of those things. So I think that all of our identities change, and also they are important because we are born into these systems, and depending on where we are situated, those identities get magnified or treated a certain way, right? So we are both oppressed and have privilege at the same time, depending on the context that we are in, right? And I really have learned through my life's work that all of that is true. So we can't claim to be only oppressed without privilege, because in certain contexts, I'm privileged. If I speak more English, I'm privileged over my parents who don't speak English, right? If I'm educated, I'm privileged over those who have not had opportunities for education. Living in America privileges us over people who live in third world countries or in countries that are impoverished. But at the same time, I'm a person of color, I'm a woman, I'm English is not my first language. All of these things also means that I have experienced biases and oppression depending on the context, right? So all of those things are true at once, and that's why it's really important to understand ourselves holistically, and to be able to know that we all work at the intersections of multiple identities, and we have to always um, uh, examine that, right? We have to put a mirror up to ourselves when we do the work, because it doesn't mean that we are always oppressed people in certain circumstances, but it also doesn't mean that we have never experienced oppression, because we may have an identity that has had privileges, right? So I've learned a lot about that work by doing the organizing, community building, and social justice movement work that I've spent my life really working on.
Thank you for sharing that. I want to talk a little bit about, your path to leadership.
Yeah.
How did you begin to recognize that leadership could look different when rooted in culture, solidarity, and collective power?
Gosh, I mean, I think growing up, I didn't even think about words like leadership, right? Because when people talked about leaders, they weren't talking about people particularly who shared many of my identities. So I never got into this work because I was thinking about leadership. I got into it because along the way, I cared about certain things, and then I paid attention to what I like or what I didn't like. And then I always tried to be in spaces where I thought that I could be useful. And ultimately, I discovered some of those things are defined as leadership, right? And then I'm also kind of an impatient person, which means I don't like to just talk about problems, because that is not good for the spirit. And so I tend to lean towards doing things, right? I bias towards actions, and that means that if I think there is a problem, of course I'm going to talk about it because I want to understand it, but I'm talking about it because I'm trying to figure out what should I spend my time and energy and resources on, So eventually along the way, I ended up doing a lot of things, right? When most people would just want to talk about it, I already was thinking, well, this is what we could do, or this is what we could try. And I like to work with people, so I'm not a solo actor. I like to problem solve with people. I like to work with people who are way smarter than me, who can bring their expertise to bear for the purposes of creating change and that kind of thing. And so eventually those are the kinds of things that I think people define as leadership, right? So to me, leadership is not a person. Leadership is about what you choose to do, and it is about how you carry yourself, and how you are able to bring other people along, and how you build with others, and those kinds of things. So I feel really lucky that along the way I've met really good people who sometimes recognize my gifts before I even recognize my own gifts, right? They're like, "Oh, you're really good at that. We want you to do that." Or when there were opportunities, they would say, I really think you should work on this, or you should lead this organization, those kinds of things. I think that sometimes we don't recognize where we should be, and so it's really good to have people who care about you, who think about what you're good at, and they remember you, and things like that. And then ultimately, being able to consistently do something enough, so that, because leadership is not about doing something once. Leadership is about being able to do things consistently over your years, because all of us are not our roles, right? Like, we don't get hired to do something and then you become a leader. You are doing things, and then you may be given an opportunity that has lots of responsibilities, but it's not the fact that you do that thing one time. It's that over time people see that you consistently show up, that you consistently do things. And so I just feel really lucky. I mean, I started my work both because I was a young Hmong daughter who was experiencing a lot of things my own family was going through, and then Eventually, I also worked a lot on gender based, anti gender based violence things and gender justice kinds of things, because I saw firsthand what it meant to be, a Hmong girl who wasn't given opportunities and things. And those were things that I knew immediately I could talk about, and lots of other girls could relate to, right? But it wasn't just the act of doing that. Like I said, eventually, along the way, I discovered that, hey, I'm actually pretty good at um, leading teams, or hey, I'm actually pretty good at building institution or creating policy, or those kinds of things, right? So having some of those hardcore technical skills also gives you particular responsibilities within kind of the realm of leadership that helps to shape then what you spend your time and energy on, right?
That's amazing. And that's so informative and so helpful, especially for myself. And I'm sure lots of the listeners just trying to navigate what leadership looks like, because everyone thinks it's a different thing. So thank you for sharing. You talked a little bit about, some of the organizations that you were part of or you led. And I want to talk quickly about the Coalition of Asian American Leaders, so CAAL. Um, that organization has become such a cornerstone in Minnesota. What was your vision, when you were co-founding it, and how has it grown to shift representation and policy?
Yeah, I mean, Cal started because I was at a time of transition in my own career. So I had been working at a national organization and had been traveling back and forth between here and San Francisco and New York quite a bit. And so after I had my daughter, I felt really strongly about kind of staying put in a local community. And so even though I was living here, I wasn't. I wasn't as involved in doing the work here, but I was supporting a lot of the work here. So when I was making that transition, I just started talking to people. I was asking them about, how they felt about the Asian Americans in the state and how they were doing overall, and whether Asian Americans were involved in shaping decisions that impacted their lives every day, right? And what I heard consistently was, we had a pretty fragmented ecosystem of communities who often represented just their own ethnicities, right? And then that overall, people tended to think of the nonprofit sector as the sector that would solve social ills, but there wasn't really a lot of places for like people who worked in different other different sectors. And then that young people were really craving a space where they were also included, right? And so I talked to lots and lots of people, and I thought, by the end of the year, if I could get 75 leaders together to have a conversation about how we build forward, that would be success. But I did so much talking to people that at the end of that year, we had a gathering and 400 people showed up. Yeah. And they all just wanted to talk. They all just wanted to talk about what mattered to them. They all wanted to think together about how we define leadership, and how Asian Americans, like the complexities of the Asian American identity here in Minnesota, because it's not just about one ethnicity, but also how do we not give up on kind of our cultural ethnic identities and still build kind of systemic power to be able to inform and influence and things like that. And so that kind of became the premise when I thought, like, we have a real shot at creating something different, something that would be a large tent for leaders, no matter what sector they worked in and what generations they were part of, but also that we could have people talk about the complexities and also prioritize together and do some things together. So it was a very intentional process about what that invited people to a space to talk about what mattered, and then what are the strategies that we could move forward together. So they became research, policy, and leadership. And so, when the community tells you tangibly and you are a good listener, then I always feel like the plan can come, right? Because, people care a lot about it. And so it just became an organization that to me was really important. It was social justice oriented. It brought together many leaders across the state. I felt really, honored and privileged that I got to know so many people through that process, and that they all showed up repeatedly. And I think that's what made us effective, right? Was that we were so um, um, engaged, and we had created a space where people wanted to show up and do work together, and that it didn't matter that they didn't work in the nonprofit sector, and it didn't matter that they were um, you know uh, um, just like some of them had never done community building or community organizing work, but they cared about what was going to happen, right? And then eventually, because we were informed by the community, and then we paired it with research and um, uh, community-based research, and things, then we could formulate policies and be able to try to figure out, okay, how what are the policies that matters to communities that will enable them to have their own power to shape the decisions, right? Whether it's at the school district level, at the municipal city level, county level, or at the state level, that they could be a part of that, right? So I did that for about 10 years, and I always knew that I would help to build an organization and create it, and get it to a healthy place, so that the next leader who came after me would have a long runway. So I was really proud that I left it in a really good place, and somebody else could take over it and can continue the legacy of that organization. But I was honored and humbled to be able to do that work with so many people across the state. Yeah.
Oh, that's so amazing. You're aiming for 75 and 400 showed up. So you know it was real. It was really needed.
Yes, yes. Uh-huh.
I want to talk about another organization.
Sure.
So, through Red Green Rivers, you
Yes.
created a platform for women artisans
Mhm.
in Southeast Asia to connect to global markets.
Yeah.
How did this idea come about, and what transformation have you witnessed in the communities that you've partnered with?
Yeah. Well, I think sometimes we work on big systems change, and sometimes we work on just, very individualistic change, and that's okay, right? I mean, I feel like that way about all the opportunities that I've been able to work on, is that we can work at all different levels, and it's okay. And so Red Green Rivers really came about because my partners then, Gayeng Yang and Gajova, we were working on gender justice issues. And one of the issues that we worked on was really about Hmong Americans, older Hmong Americans in this country who were traveling overseas and often marrying very young girls, and then bringing them here and taking away kind of their opportunities, right? Under the auspice of marriage and things like that. And of course, they have a right to do that, but young people often decided to marry these much older spouses because they wanted access to opportunities. It's not because they were in love; they just wanted the opportunities. But when opportunity um, covers itself in a marriage, rather than, like, can I pay for your education, or, how can I help you start a business? Then, it causes lots of perpetual gender oppression, right? And so one of the things that we did was to go travel overseas and to talk to Hmong women and to ask them about why they made these kinds of choices, right? Of course, we can say we know, And in some ways we know because we have heard about it from relatives or we know people ourselves, but there's nothing like actually just going and talking to young women about why they make those decisions, right? That's important for us to do too. And so when we were asking young women, one of the things that we heard consistently was really about them not having access to their own money, that oftentimes they made these decisions based on their economic needs. And so for a young woman, if they felt like if they could make these choices and it would help their families, that they would do it, right? And so Red Green Rivers became a vehicle for us to build on the gifts and skills of Hmong women, through silversmithing, sewing bandao, all these different things that women have learned from generation to generation. And what we did was to try to bring their products to the market, because it's not about them producing it and selling it over there, because they could do that, but they could never make the kind of money that was, one, fair for the labor, and second, that would actually be adequate for them to take care of themselves and their families, right? So Red Green Rivers was both about the art of recognizing the gifts that Hmong women had with these kinds of cultural and indigenous art that have been passed from generation to generation. Like you and I like pandao, but we may not do it ourselves now, right? In fact, so many Hmong Americans buy machine made stuff, but that doesn't actually go to a Hmong maker. That money goes to a company, right, that has profited off the art of Hmong people, right? So it's not making a Hmong family better; it's making that company more rich, right? So it was during the time. I don't know if you remember this, but I think Walmart had this Hmong scarf, and people went crazy over it. And then they started selling it on Amazon and things. But it was just a print scarf that had many Hmong designs. So everybody purchased it, right? And what I was asking was, well, do people who buy that scarf, obviously Hmong people loved it because it was Hmong designs, right? But I was saying, do those Hmong people who buy it, do they understand that it actually doesn't benefit a Hmong person, right? That it was made by a company that took Hmong art and then now sold it back to us. And then we love it because we can identify with it, but it actually doesn't make a Hmong person rich at all, right? So what it actually did was that it minimized the role of all these Hmong women who were sewing in their villages, trying to make and try ends meet. And so when we were traveling through Laos, Vietnam, and Thailand, and we were asking these women how they felt about seeing that kind of um, mass print of Hmong designs sold, they just said, we're never going to see a penny of it, right? That all these designs that, people would go to the Hmong villages to buy all of the old Hmong clothes. And then they took it and then they realized it was really beautiful. And then instead of paying Hmong women to sew more, they would just print it or they would have the machine sew it, right? So in fact, it was very exploitative and also extractive, right? So that's why Red Green River started, was both about, well, um, it is a gift to know how to make that kind of art, and we should also value it, right? When we buy things, we have an affinity to it because we recognize the designs right away, right? And we're like, oh, that's Hmong, I love it, I'm going to buy it. But we want consumers to be more conscious, to say, oh, is that product made by a Hmong woman or a Hmong person, right? And if a Hmong person takes a month to sew a pandao, then we should value that and we should pay more for that product, right? Because it helps them. And then the women who said, they make these poor choices sometimes because they don't have economic means, right? And the thing that they knew how to do was these indigenous art forms. And so it was like pairing all of that together and saying that through Red Green Rivers, we could bring products to the market directly from the makers from Thailand, Laos, and Vietnam, so that Hmong women could increase their economic well-being and help their themselves and their families. And it's been really wonderful. Like, we worked with a young Hmong woman who never imagined walking into a bank to open her own bank account, right? She says, I walk past this bank all the time and I have never entered it. And so, but when she started to make bracelets for us, it was the first time that she was making enough money for herself. She was helping her brother pay for his education, but she had enough so that she could walk into the bank for the first time to open an account, right? So that matters, right?
Thank you so much for sharing that. I'm getting so emotional. I just love stories like that, and it's because of these types of organizations that we get to help our Hmong sisters anywhere and everywhere, right? Like, I know we talk a lot about Hmong Americans, folks who are in America, or not even just America, but have immigrated elsewhere other than kind of Asia, Southeast Asia. And we forget that we have sisters over there that don't necessarily, like you mentioned earlier, like have the privileges that we do,
Yeah,
right? So thank you for
yeah,
sharing
yeah.
that.
And using our privilege in a way that actually
Hmm.
values them,
Yeah.
right? So at Red Green Rivers, that my partners and I, we agreed that we would buy the products outright. So if we told
Mm.
a maker to make a certain quantity, that we wouldn't wait until we sold it to give them their money. We would buy the product so that if we didn't sell it, we would take the loss, but they wouldn't, right?
Wow.
Because so many, even now with Hmong businesses, I'm glad because Facebook Market has become a thing. It wasn't when we started, right? So now sometimes makers sell directly to buyers themselves, and then sometimes
Mhm.
they're still selling a lot of it for Hmong American sellers. But then they like we have to value that kind of indigenous art because it's a
Mhm.
dying art, right? Like,
Yeah.
I don't know how to do it. My daughter doesn't know how to do it.
I don't either.
Yeah, and it's really beautiful. And,
Yeah.
we know just symbolically what it means and
Mhm.
why it's so important to us. And so, yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. I want to talk a little bit about kind of the significant leadership positions that you've kind of held throughout your career. Um, what have you learned about influencing systemic change from inside of these
Yeah.
spaces?
Yes. Um, I mean, I think for me, the most important thing is that we need to have inside and outside strategies for change, right? That sometimes it's not just about being so upset at something that is as egregious as, police brutality, for example, right? We see that example every day. And so, when we see a young Hmong boy who is murdered for carrying a screwdriver that the police took as a gun, and we are upset about that, we can show up at a protest, and that's an outside strategy because we all make noise because we want the system to know that we see it as an injustice, and that kind of perpetuation of power and violence is harmful to our communities, right? And that we should do that and participate in that, and that's important. But sometimes the slow work of being inside of systems, because systems are the ways by which power is kept and held and used, right? On the masses, so whether it's elections or whether it's positions within companies or all of these things, that it's also important to be able to be in the belly of the beast if you will, to be able to understand, well, how do people make the decisions they make and why do they make the decisions they make? And that sometimes having the ability to influence, the ability to make maneuvers within those systems may have a greater impact on the outcome for communities than just protesting and those kinds of things, right? So I would say both kinds of acts are really important, but being able to understand that systems are what uh, over generations protects power and also is where we all, for example, we all pay taxes, right? That goes into a public coffer that then the people we elect into office gets to decide how to spend that money, and that money either comes back to support us in health, education, housing, anything, or it gets rewarded to a certain few people, right? And so that's why it matters that we have people on the inside, whether they are elected, whether they are hired, whether they are, just citizens who show up to provide a testimony and say, I think that's wrong, or, this is what I think you should do with that. I think that's why it's important, right? So I think I have been on both fronts. I have been, as a young person, have been to many protests and marches and, campaigns, boycotts, all of those things. That's important to do. But also at the end of the day, we have to be able to go inside of systems and be a part of it so that we can help to shape it and move it, even if it feels super slow, right? Because the fight for justice, the fight for fairness, the fight for peace, all of these things are things that we have to actually live every day. They don't happen because we marched in the street one day, right? So for me, I have tried to really think about where am I most useful, right? That sometimes it's on the streets and sometimes it's actually sitting on a board where I can have these really tough conversations with people around the table and say, I disagree with you. I don't think that's how we ensure fairness. I don't think that's how we support, poor people. I don't think that's how we support refugees and immigrants, that kind of thing, right? So I think the opportunities that I have taken have been both about what am I good at, um, what do I know for sure, right? And how can I help to open the door wider so that people can actually tell their own truth? Because I never want to be just the messenger constantly, because the messenger doesn't change very much. Mhm.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing that. I would love to ask, what advice would you give to the next generation of Asian American leaders?
Yeah. Gosh, I mean, I think the future is yours, right? Um, Youth is always going to win. Every day we age, and even though right now when we look at our country we might be disappointed or we might feel like how come all these adults are making really bad decisions and things like that, I want young people to actually care about their country, about their futures, about their choices and things, because it's what you do that will matter, right? um, Through my life, what I've learned is that once people have a little bit of power, they work really hard to keep that power. And people are actually pretty poor at sharing power, right? But I think when young people feel invested and when they actually say that they want to do something and they participate, that then more and more people listen, right? So I just want you to trust in yourself and to know who you are and to continue to imagine and believe that you can actually create the future that you want. And that doesn't mean it's going to happen overnight, but if you keep pushing it, then I think some things are going to change. So I have a lot of hope in young people because, because I've achieved some things with the little bit that I have. But as I tell my daughter every day, you don't have the same struggles that I have, but you have different struggles. But also, your job every day is to chase your dreams, right? To not be stuck at what people tell you you can't do, but to actually say, I actually really care about that. And, this is how I want to change the world. And so I guess my advice to young people is to continue to chase your dreams. And I know that sounds very fluffy, but it's true. And I'm saying to do that in a way not to become like anyone else, but to be more like you. And then the other thing is, as you do work, you play sports, you go to school, you are with your friends, figure out what you're really good at. Because when you know what you're good at, then you know how you can be helpful in situations, right? And I think part of that is, and when you know you're good at something, then you're not afraid to say, "Hey, I can do that," or this is what I can offer, right? But most of the time, young people are constantly told no, so sometimes they don't pay attention, and then you ask them, and you're like, "What do you like?" They say, "I don't know." Well, what are you good at? I don't know. And it's like I told my daughter, I don't know is a really bad answer. Right? So, so, you should know something. And even if you're like, well, I'm not sure, but I would like to learn this. That's even more helpful, right? So part of it is to get to know yourself better.
That's wonderful advice. Thank you. I will most definitely be sharing that with my younger siblings. We're coming down to the last couple questions here for you. Other question is: you've been named a Bush Fellow. Receiving awards like Facing Race Award and even having a day named in your honor.
Mhm.
How do you carry these recognitions, and do they do they change the way you see your leadership journey?
Yeah. Um, well, I think a couple of different ways, right? One is sometimes it's just affirmation. And as I told people who ask me all the time, because there was a period where I felt like I was getting an award every month, and I was like, this is ridiculous, right? Because I said, the truth is, I'm not doing anything different now than I was 20 years ago. It's just that it took so long for people to catch up to recognize that, oh, this person's actually really creative, right? Or like this person is really courageous and things, right? So it took people a long time to recognize that someone like me could actually do things that were meaningful, right? So in some ways, I thought, well, this is so ridiculous, right? I'm like, who needs it? But then on the other hand, it's like affirming that at least now people who were not just my friends or who cared about me saw that I could actually do some things. But the truth is, none of these awards are that meaningful because I wouldn't be where I am without all the people around me, right? But we live in a society that is so used to rewarding one person and wanting one person to be in front of the room. And even when I left Cal, it was really at the height of the organization. So people just thought, like, why would you leave now? Like, it's such a well-known organization and it's doing such good work. Because to me, that didn't matter. It wasn't about the awards and about how great we were doing. I left it because it was so healthy, right? That it was how I would have wanted to inherit an organization that I never have before. um, but also, I think that, of course, I'm always like humbled and grateful that other people recognize the work. But the truth is that it's recognition for the many people who also have worked beside me, because none of my work could have been possible by myself. I don't do things by myself. I do things with other people, right? And yes, sometimes I'm the fire starter and things like that, and I keep the torch burning and things like that. And I think that's an important role. But also, we don't have enough awards to go around, and we're not used to seeing collectives of people be awarded. And so uh, I'm, privileged to have been named, but it has always been because I've surrounded myself with good people and have been able to do good work with others. And then at the same time, I've been consistent and I keep showing up even when I make mistakes. I just do start over again. And I think there's something to that kind of determination and conviction in your work, is that our work to making the world a better place is never done. And so I find that, rewarding. And as my mother would say, uh, if you are no longer useful, nobody will be calling you. So as long as you are alive and breathing and people are calling you, then you better be doing something.
We're coming down to the last question here, Bo. I'd love to ask you this kind of final question that I ask everyone that comes on the podcast. Could you share a quote or kind of a piece of wisdom that has inspired you or inspires you um, to the listeners?
Oh, goodness. There's probably so many quotes. But I would probably say that, something that I say all the time is that, you can't just imagine the future. You actually have to invest in it. And that just means that, um, dreams are great. We need them. They are our North Star. But every day you have to do something to get you closer to that dream, right?
Mm.
So, so every day, just do something. You don't have to do everything, but you do something.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing that. Bo, thank you for coming on, sharing your journey, your story with the audience, with myself. Really, you are such an inspiration, and I am so grateful to have you come on and share your story, just because I hope it inspires the next generation as much as it's inspired me today. So thank you for coming on. And to the listeners, may Bo's journey remind you that leadership doesn't always have to mean, following a traditional path, but it can be about creating new systems and really building solidarity across differences. So be sure to check all of the description boxes below and the links to Bo's work. And yeah, thank you, Bo, for coming on.
Yeah, thank you for having me, and thank you for doing this. I appreciate it.